and I sobbed uncontrollably. Oh my god. This episode. Oh, fair warning, there's gonna be a lot of crying. I may keep this episode shorter simply because I do not have it in me to go through all this without just, like, being emotionally wrecked. I knew coming into this episode what it was going to be about, but I did watch it all of, like, 15 minutes ago because my schedule this weekend has been incredibly chaotic. Normally, I would watch it the night before and then react in the morning just to, like, sleep on it. Didn't have that grace for this episode, and this is probably the hardest episode of Precure to watch, ever. For me, specifically. Just a little bit of information beforehand. I do very, very poorly with animal loss. I think it is the one thing that just makes me cry uncontrollably. When I was in school, we had a day where we were, like, in the library and we were checking out books. And the line was really, really long. And I had picked up a book about a cat. And so I read it in line. And I managed to finish it because this was, like, first, second grade. I finished this book about this cat. And of course, it was one of those books that felt like it needed to do the entire lifespan of the cat from kittenhood to the end. And I sobbed uncontrollably. I was so insanely inconsolable and just couldn't communicate to anybody why I was so upset that I had my parents called. I have only been removed from school twice in my life. One was this. The other was because I had pink eye on Valentine's Day in 3rd grade and they were like, hey girl, you got pink eye, go home. You leave. But my mom rolled up and I remember it so much. I'm so glad she has forgotten because she was so mad. Because she was like, you did not make me leave work and pick your butt up because you were crying uncontrollably about a cat that had passed away in a book you read. She was big mad at me. She was big mad. So if that doesn't give you a little bit of a flavor of how hard this episode is for me, as well as the fact that I'm going to have to stop recording multiple times over because I will need to gather myself. I still am coming down from the headache I have just watching the episode, so I'm going to do my best to talk about what I can, and then if it gets too hard, I think I'm just going to wrap things up, to be honest. This is so ironic, because I just talked about it last week, where I was like, oh, the episodes are way easier to do than I thought they would be, and then this week came around, and just said, hey, we heard you thought things were too easy. Nonetheless, we are starting with Fuku, who is the pet that we saw last week. We already kind of, like, had a little familiarity of the dog that's getting up in years. We see pretty immediately, too, that he's a little dog with a little diaper, which is what our little sad elderly dog friends need a little assistance when it comes to certain functions that are natural. So we know he's a little old. And so does Nico-sama. She is also picking up on what's going down. They kind of try to explain the whole, like, measurement of dog age, which I feel like is I think it's a little dumb at sometimes, because I think it very much depends on the breed, and then the math on it gets really silly. Usually just my rule of thumb is most animals, or most pets specifically, like cat, dog, like typical ones, do not go past the age of 20. That's usually like, you know they're old. I have had one cat in my life who has made it to 22, and that is the eldest we have seen in an animal go. The dogs typically are younger than cats. I have a friend right now who has an elderly poodle, and she is 14, and every time I've talked to her, that is like an exceptionally old age for her poodle. And her poodle also has, you know, the diaper and has the different situations. She has trouble getting up and down the stairs. Like, I feel like the age thing is just kind of superfluous to the point. Usually it depends on the dog breed, and I don't know. But I'm glad that they explain this to a degree, because one fear that I had with this topic, knowing the week ahead, that we were going to go into an episode where there was going to be an elderly lady who lost her dog, I hoped, like, my only fear for this episode was that they needed to convey that pets don't simply, like, just die when you're old. Unfortunately, as much as I wish that were the case. An animal's time will come usually earlier than yours. And it's just easier that we have an older lady going through it rather than our main characters. I think this episode is heavy either way. But I do think if there's any way that they could take the burden off our characters a little bit, it would be having someone who is older deal with it, instead of it being directly one of the kids in the show dealing with it. I do like that we learned that Fuku had a connection with Iroha prior to all of this. I think that's just a sweet little nod. There's so much about the series has always connected back to Iroha, and I feel like just her being another sort of like kind of connection point sort of feels a little bit full circle. I also love that we kind of, again, the episodes, I haven't mentioned it in a while, but the episodes do try to make sure the entire cast is included. Satoru informed us about dog age, and then Mayu's jumping in here to be like, oh, I have an idea, because they're ultimately deciding to throw a party for our little elderly dog. And she's like, well, what better way to celebrate the memory of someone than patchwork? Take different pieces of cloth that all have different unique meaning to them. And I really love that. Like, I can't say that the patchwork aesthetic of quilts and stuff has ever been very appealing to me visually, but the sentimental idea behind it I love a lot. So I thought this was just like a precious way to, again, include Mayu, include her skill work, and then really tie it into the theme of the episode without it feeling very intrusive. Like, they're not trying to drop a product here. They're not like, buy the Precure brand quilt. They're just bringing this up and reminding us who Mayu is and how she relates to the story. And of course we see everybody sort of celebrating and getting ready for this party that, like, honestly, they're going really hard on this party. I'm not gonna lie. I barely see this effort in regular parties. I also like that we get to see, of course, the rest of the trio working on this, as well as reminiscing on all the times they've had with Fuku. And this is what I really like about the episode. I think this is probably my favorite thing that they put in here as I try to emotionally prepare myself to talk about it. Like I said before, I did not want them to just have the story be that, like, oh, your dog will pass away when you're elderly. And I love that they have that this woman not only is dealing with this now, but had dealt with it previously. She talks about how this dog was her first dog, and after it passed away, she's like, I'll never see a dog again, which I relate so deeply to this story. My first cat I got when I was 4 years old and passed when I was 18. And as someone who was about to go away to college, it was incredibly devastating for me. But my little co-host, who is with me for every one of these episodes, always sitting in my lap as she is now, came very unexpectedly in my life shortly after I had lost my first cat. Now I have her, who is now also deemed elderly. I'm hoping she will be in my life as long as possible, and I love her so, so much. So I very much relate to this story super deeply. I also like that despite her losing her best friend, she still is very involved in the animal community, still volunteers, still is staff. I love that she's not given up on this world despite having gone through that. And then she meets a little baby Fuku who reminds her of that past love, who comes into her life in an unexpected way. And it's such a heartwarming and sweet moment that I absolutely adore that is included in this. I also love the way they handle these invitations. I love the little paw print from Komugi. It's very sweet. I just need something right now just to bring myself back as I try to continue through the rest of this. We also learn that both of these doofuses are bad at cooking, because we obviously see Komugi here, but then they take the time to zoom in on Iroha and be like, girl is letting that pot boil over. She is also terrible at cooking. Meanwhile, Torame ends up finding a giant egg in the side of the mountain. The girls go off to deal with the Gagoon. In the meantime, Fuku is taking a turn for the worst, because it has to be as dramatic as possible, and as emotionally compromising as it has been. I do love that, well, I think love is a weird way to put it. I feel like a lot of series tend to not let the elderly characters have a lot of facial expressions or emotions. I feel like there's this huge emphasis on, like, being older and not being able to feel the same range of emotions you have as a kid. And I've really hated that a lot of series do this, because it's not that when you reach adulthood and, like, onwards in adulthood that you don't feel things anymore. You have a stronger hold on your emotions. You can control them a little bit better. But that doesn't mean you're incapable of feeling. So I love that they put in expressions for her. She is feeling all these emotions, and it's not like she's putting on a brave face. She's not somebody who is really hiding the fact that this is taking a toll on her. And I appreciate that. And now to switch gears, I will just make jokes for the remainder of this section of it. We have the giant chicken! For those of you who don't know, there's a lot of genetic evidence that there is huge links between dinosaurs, specifically like T-Rexes, and chickens. There's a lot of theories that a lot of media doesn't acknowledge, where it's believed that a lot of dinosaurs had feathers instead of scales. A little more avian than reptilian. And the animation for this episode is spot on. I really enjoyed that for what this episode was and how heavy it's being, they brought out the big guns. The shield formation here is phenomenal. I love their powers there. It's kind of depressing that at the end of the day, a lot of the efforts that they put in this battle don't go well. But, I mean, at least we get really solid animation. Like, there's a lot of love in this fight. For more reasons than one. And then we see a big turning point for Torame, because we've been showcasing Torame to be not as nefarious as he was implied to be initially. But here, he genuinely sees a human trying very desperately to be there for her dog. And we see it shake him. He's genuinely so concerned that he bothers to go over there and see what's happening. And doesn't attack or anything. And you can see he's pained. And eventually reach the point where he straight up stops the T-Rex. Which, kind of sad that that happens on the grounds that it does not, like, I'm not fully convinced the girls would have handled fighting a T-Rex at the end of the day. Are they not strong enough to handle that? Like, I understand that they're not going to hurt the T-Rex because of, like, the formula for this season, but I kind of wanted to see them be able to do it within their own abilities and not have to have Torame basically just stop it. But I think I'll let that slide. I don't think that's a big enough thing to, like, be really upset about, all things considered in this episode. Also, shout out to our pink bird. Like, look at this little guy. Got, like, a strawberry lemonade T-Rex going on here. Okay, back to being sad. We have the news break of what is likely to come. And we have this one moment that I think is pretty big, where Iroha is like, is there nothing we can do? Because that's such a thing that even as an adult kind of is frustrating about, like, animal lifespans, is like, is there nothing we can do to extend that? Is there nothing we can do to keep them? And it's just, it's such a cruel thing at the end of the day. But nonetheless, we are all there for the final moments. Komugi gets to shine in her translative ways to give a just beautiful monologue at the end. And then there's this Nico-sama moment, which I was dead. I barely can talk now, man. This is just, oh my god. And then this happens and I can't even talk about it. I'm just, out the door. I'm so sorry. I cannot. I am too sad. Oh my god. I'm barely keeping it together as it is. Like, there's no words. It speaks for itself at this point. Oh my god. And I love that this little triptych includes Iroha specifically also being a memory in this whole phase. It hits. I do love that they have this image here. It's a brief cut, but it showcases that, like, people are not handling it well. It's not like everybody just smiled and we had tears and we called it a day. Like, it was rough for everybody. But something that's very interesting about this scene, as I try to get this out, we don't see directly Komugi and Iroha's reaction. In this next scene, we do get a hint that Iroha did not take this well, and that's probably going to tie into the next episode. But Komugi, interestingly enough, doesn't seem to have any big reaction that we get privy to. And I wonder if that's done intentionally. I don't, like, it's either going to go in the direction of Komugi fully doesn't understand what has occurred, or that they're holding back Komugi's feelings to just, like, have that devastate us in a future episode. Speaking of the future episode briefly, it looks like we are now heading to, like, we really are in the final episodes. I also wanted to just, like, comment on the fact that I love when Precure does this, but I obviously do not want it every season, and I don't think it needs to be every time. Usually within the last 10 episodes, we have some heavy-hitting episode with very realistic commentary that usually ends up being very shocking for the community. Spoilers for Hakuto. We had the final episode with childbirth. Spoilers for Healing Good. We had that episode towards the end, which I think was also either like 44 or something along those lines, where we had the conversation about boundaries and consent, which I think was really important to have. And I really think it was a bold but necessary decision to have in these shows. This is another one of those that I think is just going to have that lasting impression that genuinely is very changing for the community and the audience and so on and so forth. And I really appreciate they do stuff like this. This episode easily is the hardest episode I have ever watched in Precure. But I absolutely would not trade it for the world. Very, very worth it to have it. And they did it very respectfully. Pretty much any concerns I had were washed away. They addressed everything. I loved this episode. Anyways, back to talking about the next episode. It is going to be a Torame episode. It looks like it is very likely to be his last, or at least get into his last arc. But I wonder with the way that this episode went, specifically with Torame, if we may not see him past this next episode. One thing that was implied a while back was that when Torame and Zakuro came into the show, They were resurrected by Galil. Technically speaking, I do not believe that they are fully alive, or meant to be alive. And I have the fear, but I also would not be, like, remiss if there was a bit where, like, why he's looking so optimistic and wants to play in the next episode is because he also is acknowledging that it's his time to pass on. So the next episode, if there is going to be any sad moments, they really hit it. I genuinely think there's going to be something emotional in the next episode. But I do think they have done everything in their power to, like, slice it and dice it so that we see a lot of Iroha smiling and we see a lot of Torame smiling. I don't know how much that's gonna happen next episode. I don't know, I'm worried. I could just be overestimating things because I'm sad right now. But I am somewhat concerned for the next episode being another emotional destroyer. But we'll see. We'll see where they handle it. But it has a way too optimistic name. Way too optimistic name. So we'll see if they, like, kick me in the heart again. We'll see what happens. Oh, I feel like the rest of the season is going to be very difficult to review. But I don't want to talk anymore. I'm gonna go and cry while I edit this. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye!